There's this moment, right before your life splits in half like a cracked windshield, that no one ever warns you about. It doesn't come with a bang or flashing lights or dramatic music swelling in the background. No, it arrives quietly, wrapped in routine, tucked between the coffee pot turning off by itself and the clatter of your wife's keys hitting the bowl by the front door. For me, it was a Thursday. I remember because the garbage disposal was jammed again, and Marla had that distracted, half-listening expression on her face when I told her I'd fix it after work. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read her silence better than her words, but lately, that silence had started to feel like the kind you find in an abandoned house, haunting, hollow, and cold in places it used to be warm. Back then, I still believed we were just coasting. You know, the kind of middle-aged fog every long-term couple hits eventually. The passion fades, the spark dims, and the conversations shrink down to tax forms, grocery lists, and reminders about dentist appointments. I didn't think we were broken. I didn't think we were sinking. I certainly didn't think I was being played by the very man who had shaken my hand 2 months earlier and told me he respected the hell out of me. Chad Harmon. Sleek suits, expensive watch, that fake humble swagger you only notice once it's too late. He wasn't just a new executive brought into the company, I was the one who helped bring him in, pitched his addition to the board, vouched for him based on a glowing referral from a client I trusted. Turns out, the only thing Chad was interested in developing was a deeper relationship with my wife, behind my back, right under my roof, and with a smile that made you want to punch his perfect teeth straight down his throat. I wish I could say I saw it coming, but the truth is, I didn't. I was too busy keeping the lights on, too caught up in running operations at the company I helped build from scratch to notice my world was being slowly hollowed out like a rotting tree. The irony? I thought things were finally getting better. The business was growing, I'd just signed a massive deal that brought in a new supply chain partner, and I was planning a surprise weekend getaway to rekindle something that had been gone so long, I wasn't even sure what it felt like anymore. But what I didn't realize was that while I was out there trying to build a future for both of us, Marla was busy building a secret life for herself, one she clearly didn't plan on sharing with me for much longer. It started with a vibration, just a soft buzz from my phone on the kitchen counter while I rinsed out my coffee mug, still half full from the morning rush I never seemed to beat. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was a calendar alert or another group thread about weekend plans I'd end up canceling anyway. But when I glanced down and saw the name Russell M. A name I hadn't seen in over a decade, I felt that same tight, anxious twist in my gut that used to coil up before a high school fight you couldn't avoid. Russell was an old friend, more of a friend really, a guy I used to grab beers with back when life still had room for poker nights and last-minute road trips. We hadn't talked since his divorce, which was messy in the way house fires are messy, ugly, tragic, and impossible to look away from. So when I saw his name lighting up my screen, followed by a single line of text that read, "I know this is random, but I think you need to know what I saw at the Glen last night," something in me immediately knew that whatever was about to come next would wreck me. I stepped out into the garage and shut the door behind me like I was hiding from something, maybe from Marla, who was upstairs with her headphones on, claiming she had another late-night Zoom meeting with the West Coast team. That line was becoming a favorite of hers lately, and I hated how easily it slipped off her tongue, polished and practiced like a speech she'd given too many times to count. I stared at the screen as the dots appeared, typing, until finally the message dropped. Marla. With some tall guy in a gray suit. Looked like he knew her body like a habit. Definitely not just dinner. I read it 3 times, then once more out loud, just to hear how the words felt in the air. I didn't respond. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, motionless, surrounded by power tools and dusty lawn chairs, wondering how many times a man can be punched in the soul before something inside him starts to die quietly. It's hard to explain what betrayal feels like when it comes from the person you built your world around. It's not loud, not at first. It's quiet, like a shift in pressure before a storm tears the roof off your house. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't rage or accuse or cry or ask stupid questions like why or how long. Instead, I waited. I waited for her footsteps down the stairs, the fake yawn, the story about how Kelly in marketing wouldn't stop talking. And when she kissed my cheek, lips cold, smile automatic, I played my part like a goddamn Oscar-winning actor. Because if this was going to be a game, I was going to learn the rules, master the board, and burn the whole thing down before they even realized I was playing. You always hear people say, deep down, I knew. But the truth is, I didn't. Not really. I had my suspicions, sure, but I chalked them up to midlife paranoia, that nagging insecurity that creeps in around your 50s when the mirror becomes a stranger and your wife's laughter starts sounding more like a performance than an emotion. But when Russell's message cracked the glass, I didn't just see the truth, I saw everything that had been hiding behind it. The missed calls Marla never explained, the sudden switch to perfume she used to say was too strong, the way she started wearing heels to Zoom meetings, and worst of all, the hollow way she started saying, love you, like it was a habit she was trying to break gently. And that's when I did what I swore I'd never do in our entire marriage, I went through her phone. God help me, I picked that thing up while she was in the shower, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest, hands shaking like I was 15 and stealing whiskey from my old man's cabinet. I wasn't prepared for how fast the truth came at me. There wasn't even an attempt to hide it anymore. No code names. No secret folders. Just a string of messages from a contact saved as CH-BD, which I would later find out stood for business development, though based on the tone of those texts, the only thing developing was a private relationship that had no business existing. One message burned itself into my memory so hard I swear I can still see it every time I close my eyes. Still can't believe your husband let you walk around the house in that skirt without ripping it off. Clueless. And her reply, like a dagger dipped in acid, he's too busy playing hero to notice I've been gone for a long time. I don't know what broke me more, the smugness of Chad or the cold indifference of the woman I'd built a life with. 20 years of memories, vacations, anniversaries, the birth of our daughter, all reduced to digital ash in a screen I couldn't stop staring at. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't burst through the bathroom door like a man possessed. I sat there on the edge of the bed like a corpse that hadn't figured out it was dead yet. The shower stopped. She stepped out humming a tune that sounded cheerful and disgusting all at once, like she was washing the evidence off her skin while I sat there drowning in it. When she walked past me, wrapped in a towel, and said, "You okay? You look pale," I nodded and forced a smile so convincing I could have sold it to the academy. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying, this wasn't a one-time mistake, and it wasn't even about love anymore. It was a game, and I had just learned the rules far too late. But what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the man she thought was blind had just opened his eyes, and he was done playing the fool. You would think discovering that your wife has been sleeping with someone behind your back for God knows how long would be the worst part, but that wasn't it, not for me. What gutted me wasn't just the affair. It was who the other man was. You see, Chad Harmon wasn't just some stranger who slid into her messages on a whim. No, Chad was a man I invited into my world, a polished executive with gleaming teeth and an expensive pen, someone who walked into our company boardroom with smooth words, fake humility, and a handshake that had the grip of a politician and the soul of a thief. I was the one who made the case for bringing him in, stood in front of our partners, vouched for his integrity, told them he was the kind of man who could take us to the next level. The irony burns hotter than acid when you realize you opened the door for the wolf and handed him a key to the pantry, and the bedroom. At first, I thought the affair was the end of the line. But then the dots started connecting like a spiderweb stretched across my chest. I remembered the closed-door meetings Chad started requesting without me, always scheduled last minute, always justified with corporate buzzwords like streamlining or strategic direction. I remembered how he started speaking over me in meetings, hijacking my project reports and dressing them up as his own vision, while our board members, too distracted by his charm and the promise of growth, began turning to him for answers I used to give. There were emails I was conveniently left out of, sudden questions about performance gaps in my division, and whispers, quiet, subtle, but I heard them. And I felt it. Like standing in a room full of smiling faces while your chair is being quietly pulled out from under you. It wasn't just my marriage that was under siege, it was my life's work. The company I helped build from scratch, the long nights of missing dinners, the sacrifices I made for something bigger than myself, it was all being stolen, piece by piece, by the same man who was screwing my wife while shaking my hand with the other. The rage that brewed inside me wasn't explosive, it was cold, still, strategic. A different kind of fire. Because I realized then that I wasn't going to just catch them. No. I was going to bury them. And when I was done, Chad wouldn't just lose my wife, he'd lose everything he ever thought he controlled. And Marla? She'd be left with the ashes of 2 lives she destroyed, thinking she could play chess with a man who spent 20 years learning how to build an empire from nothing. The moment I knew, truly knew, that they were both using me like a stepping stone laid in the dirt, I wanted to walk into that office boardroom with a gas can and burn every thread of my life to ash. I wanted to confront Chad in front of the entire executive team and expose him for the fraud he was, wanted to slap the truth out of Marla's painted-on smile the moment she slid into our bed like she hadn't just been with him hours earlier. I wanted screaming, chaos, full-scale war, but I didn't. Because something inside me, something deeper and darker than pain, whispered to me in a voice colder than winter steel, wait. And I did. I waited, and in the silence, I sharpened myself like a blade. Because revenge isn't satisfying when it's rushed. It's only satisfying when it's perfect. That night, after pretending to sleep beside the woman I no longer recognized, I stared at the ceiling and made a list, not on paper, not on my phone, but in my head where no one could reach it. I started cataloging everything I knew about Chad. His weaknesses. His habits. His appetite for risk. His tendency to mix personal pleasure with business travel. And I started compiling a mental war chest of allies, quiet, observant coworkers who disliked him but lacked the leverage to speak up. I thought about my friend Danny in accounting who once mentioned that Chad's expense reports looked a little creative. I remembered a quiet HR assistant who used to get coffee with Marla back when she still worked in the building, and how her eyes flickered with something unsaid whenever Chad walked by. I knew if I was going to take them down, I needed more than fury, I needed evidence, timing, and precision. I started with the simplest step, I met with a divorce attorney, quietly, discreetly, under the guise of a business lunch at a restaurant Marla hated. Then I hired a private investigator. Not just any gumshoe with a camera, but a former forensic auditor who specialized in financial infidelity, because that's what this was, wasn't it? A theft of loyalty. Of money. Of identity. I didn't confront her. I didn't flinch. I played husband like it was the role I was born for, rubbing her back while she checked her phone under the covers, pouring her wine while she lied to my face about working late, all while tracking her location and quietly gathering digital footprints she couldn't erase even if she wanted to. Because when the day came, I didn't want shouting. I wanted silence. I wanted her to see the calm in my eyes and realize, far too late, that the storm had been building all along, right under her roof, in the man she thought was too soft to fight back. There's a special kind of power in knowing something no one else knows, a twisted calm that wraps around you like armor, hardening your skin against every fake smile and every lie you let them tell without blinking. I didn't just watch them, I studied them. While Chad strutted through the office in his tailored suits and $1,000 loafers, shaking hands and taking meetings like he owned the place, I was in the background, invisible by choice, collecting data like a machine with a soul. The investigator I hired. Worth every cent. She sent me photos, call logs, timestamps, GPS pins, proof so concrete it could sink a ship, and that's exactly what I planned to do. But the prize wasn't just the affair. I wasn't going to let my anger stop at watching them suffer emotionally. No, I wanted something bigger. I wanted ruin, the kind that gets whispered about in boardrooms long after the ashes settle. I began slipping quietly into places I no longer belonged, accessing documents I had once built, then watched slowly get twisted by Chad's influence. My background in operations gave me access he didn't even realize I still had: vendor accounts, pipeline reports, internal audits, infrastructure logs. I found discrepancies, small at first, like inflated vendor costs or bonuses paid to consultants that didn't exist. It didn't take long before I realized Chad had been playing a different game all along, padding pockets, faking milestones, even shifting timelines to hide failures behind temporary wins. But here's the thing about smart thieves: they get cocky. They leave trails, little ones, thinking no one's watching. But I was. I printed everything. Secured it all. Hard copies. Flash drives. Redundancies hidden in 3 different places. Then I sent anonymous tips, first to compliance, then to the internal ethics line. The trap had been set. The countdown had begun. While all of this unfolded like a symphony written in shadows, Marla was none the wiser. She still came home late, still lied with that fake softness in her voice, still called me babe like it was some kind of sick joke. She had no clue that I had access to her phone, that I was watching her texts in real time, that I'd already forwarded key conversations to my attorney, marked and time-stamped, ready to blow a crater in her version of events when the divorce proceedings began. And when she smiled at me across the dinner table and asked if I wanted to do a weekend trip, just us, I smiled back with a warmth so convincing it made her believe, for a fleeting moment, that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't broken me after all. But in that moment, behind my smile, I wasn't thinking about saving anything. I was thinking about precision. I was thinking about timing. I was thinking about how satisfying it was going to be to watch the 2 of them fall, and know I never had to lift my voice to make it happen. The morning the world shifted, the air tasted different. There was a quiet hum in my chest that didn't feel like nerves, it felt like destiny, like a storm I had watched build for months was finally rolling in, and I was standing dead center, arms wide open, ready to meet it. The quarterly board meeting started like any other: polite handshakes, cheap coffee, and those fake-ass greetings that always feel more like veiled competition than camaraderie. Chad strolled in 5 minutes late, of course, with that predatory grin and a folder tucked under his arm like he had just closed $1 million deal instead of walking into the noose I'd carefully strung up with his name etched into the fibers. He didn't see it coming. That's the part that still makes me smile when I think back to that room. He had no idea I wasn't there to present numbers, I was there to end him. I waited until agenda item 5, financial anomalies and restructuring. My moment. I stood up, calm and deliberate, like a man reaching into his coat not for a gun, but for a ledger soaked in blood. I passed around the documentation without a word, just folders, labeled, time-stamped, sourced, containing every manipulated figure, every fraudulent expense, every falsified vendor payout Chad had ever signed off on. One by one, I watched the faces in that room change: confusion turned to discomfort, discomfort bled into disbelief, and finally, disbelief gave way to a kind of collective nausea as the reality hit: Chad Harmon wasn't just a womanizer or a backstabber, he was a liability so large he could sink the company if I hadn't acted. His smirk faded fast. He reached for his water like a man trying to swallow his own panic, but no drink on earth could quench the fire I just lit under his seat. And then I hit them with the closer, HR violations from 3 separate women, filed quietly, buried faster than they should have been, now resurfaced like bodies in a drained lake. He tried to speak, of course. Tried to spin it. But I didn't let him. I interrupted his first sentence with a single line, spoken clear and slow so every man and woman in that boardroom could feel the weight behind it: this is your legacy, Chad. Built on fraud, theft, and every lie you thought would stay buried. And today, it dies here. Legal was already on the call. Security was notified before I even passed out the first folder. Chad was escorted out, not as a colleague, but as a criminal. And while he shouted about misunderstandings and vendettas, I stood silent, watching the man who thought he'd stolen my life lose his in real time, one humiliating step at a time, past the same receptionist he used to flirt with like he was invincible. That wasn't just justice. That was surgical retribution, and I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The day after Chad was escorted out of the company like a disgraced politician caught with both hands and one zipper down, I came home to the same house, the same kitchen, the same wife, only I wasn't the same man anymore. And she had no idea. Marla was in the living room, sipping wine like nothing had changed, legs curled up under her like some prim little actress rehearsing the part of devoted wife. I watched her from the hallway, just long enough to let the image sink in, the woman who spent the last 5 months lying to my face, cheating on our vows, and laughing at me in texts while I folded laundry and grilled chicken on Sundays. But what she didn't know, what made it all so perfect, was that while she poured that Merlot and pretended everything was fine, she was already legally drowning in a tidal wave she couldn't see coming. The divorce papers were drawn, signed, and held in the hands of a bulldog of an attorney who'd already prepared a scorched earth strategy built on everything I'd collected. And that wasn't all. Not even close. You see, I didn't just want out, I wanted to walk away clean, while she staggered out with the life she chose to blow up tied around her neck like a ticking clock. I froze the joint accounts first, shifted the bulk of my savings into a trust under my daughter's name, locked it behind paperwork Marla wouldn't understand even if she hired 10 lawyers. I cancelled her credit card the morning after Chad's fall, right after I had the locks changed on the vacation house she thought she was still entitled to. Her car. In my name. Gone. Towed and sold within 2 hours of me texting a contact. I gave her just enough time to try and swipe that card at some boutique store before it got declined in front of a clerk who watched her face crumble. It was surgical. Deliberate. And it was only just beginning. I left the divorce summons on her pillow, right where I knew she'd see it after her yoga class. Inside was everything, the infidelity claims, the photos, the location data, the text transcripts, all packaged in the kind of evidence that no court could ignore. The scream she let out when she opened it. I heard it from the garage. And I smiled. Not because I'm cruel, but because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe and carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears a calm expression and carries a plan forged from months of suffering. She tried to call me, twice. I didn't answer. She tried to corner me in the kitchen when I walked back in, mascara streaked like melted paint, begging for explanation like she was the victim here. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her like she was furniture I no longer needed, brushed past her, and poured myself a glass of the scotch I'd been saving for years. And in that silence, in that moment of quiet between her sobs and my indifference, she realized something truly terrifying. I had never been blind, I had just been patient. I didn't cry when she left. I didn't feel a sudden wave of freedom or some euphoric rush like you see in movies. What I felt was quieter, like a long-held breath finally exhaled, like the subtle crack of a chain snapping after years of pressure you didn't even realize was there. I moved out before the paperwork was even finalized, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but because I had already decided that the house wasn't my home anymore. It was just a monument to a life built on loyalty and sacrifice, foundations that she'd jackhammered apart with every lie she told and every message she sent to that man behind my back. I found a place outside the city, a small cabin tucked between trees that didn't ask questions and a sky that didn't feel like it was pressing down on me. I slept like a man finally unhooked from a dream that had long since turned into a nightmare with perfect lighting. I lost 20 pounds without trying. My doctor said my blood pressure dropped so dramatically he thought the machine was broken. I started running again, not to escape anything, but because I finally had the mental space to enjoy my own damn body, the one I'd neglected for years while putting food on someone else's plate. I stopped checking my phone every 2 minutes. I started reading again. I reconnected with my son, who, by the way, told me in the kind of voice you don't forget that he always knew something was off with Mom, but didn't know how to tell me without breaking my heart. That moment right there. That moment healed something deep inside me, something even revenge couldn't touch. Because my son didn't just take my side, he saw me. And after years of being invisible to the woman I loved, being seen by my own flesh and blood meant more than any courtroom victory ever could. And as for Marla, the world didn't fall at her feet the way she thought it would. Turns out, people talk. Friends she used to gossip with stopped answering her calls. Her boss found out about the affair thanks to an anonymous tip and decided it was a poor reflection on company culture. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment that she couldn't decorate with guilt-free smiles or fake yoga photos. And Chad? Well, last I heard, his car got repossessed, his reputation destroyed, and his credit rating dropped so low it probably sent sparks flying when he tried to swipe a card for gas. I didn't do any of it to be cruel. I did it because sometimes, to heal, you have to remove the rot entirely, and when you cut deep enough, you don't just save the tree. You give it the chance to grow again. The call came just past midnight, when the world is quiet enough to hear your own breath, and your past has the nerve to whisper through the cracks. Her name lit up my phone like a ghost trying to claw its way out of the grave I had buried her in months ago. I stared at the screen without moving, my thumb hovering over the green icon like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, not because he wants to jump, but because he needs to remember what it felt like to almost fall. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid of what she'd say, but because I already knew. They always call when the dust settles, when the consequences finally outweigh the thrill, when the silence left behind is no longer empowering but unbearable. I watched the screen go black, the call missed, the moment passed. And in that brief flicker of light, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all this began, peace. I imagined she was sitting alone in that apartment she never wanted to call home, wrapped in the same kind of silence she used to fill with excuses and half-truths, wondering if I still hated her or, worse, if I'd stopped caring altogether. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted forgiveness. Maybe she just missed the version of me who sacrificed everything for a woman who would eventually treat his loyalty like an inconvenience. But that man is gone. Buried in the wreckage she and Chad lit with their own hands. And what rose from the ashes isn't cruel or bitter or vengeful, it's simply free. And freedom, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hits decline and goes back to sipping coffee on the porch of a life you had to fight like hell to rebuild from scratch. Before I went to bed, I opened the window and let the air drift in, cool, sharp, honest. Somewhere out there, she's still trying to explain herself to people who no longer listen. And somewhere out there, Chad's still pretending he didn't lose everything because of a man he underestimated. But here, in this quiet, simple home I built with no lies in the walls and no rot in the foundation, I finally feel weightless. The war is over. The storm has passed. And I didn't just survive it, I won. So if you're listening to this, and you've been betrayed, used, discarded like you were nothing, let me say this clearly, you are not broken. You are just beginning. Some fires don't need to be put out. Sometimes, you just step back, and watch them burn.